Well, hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world, and welcome to Sustainably Talking Live. I think this is episode 11, I think. My maths does struggle a bit when we get past 10, but I'm pretty sure it's episode 11. But if it was the old ESG show, we'd be at, according to my abacus anyway, it would be episode 78. So we've got two wonderful guests. We've got Paul Clements Hunt here, the man I always say invented ESG, which maybe, Paul, you can enlighten us on that shortly. And Masami, who's got this incredible organization that's based on the concept of celebrating positive development within an organization of doing good with an act of kindness. So stay tuned and we'll talk some more in a few seconds. Okay, right. Well, I hope you can hear me all right. I had a bit of a panic then when I saw my microphone was on mute, but I think that happened automatically when I pressed the music. So hopefully I'm not on mute and you can hear me. Okay, so on the show today, I'm going to introduce Masami and Paul properly in a minute, but I thought we'd get straight in there and ask you both some questions just to get this thing rolling. So today's talk is about extractive versus regenerative capitalism. So before I introduce you both, Paul, can you tell us what you think of as extractive capitalism?
What we've really had for the last 250 years. It's, it's a political economy which has grown up over a period of time, quite understandably and naturally, and it extracts the resources of the world, but all the resources of people. And, that has made a limited number of people wealthy. And but I think it's run its time. So it's a political economy which developed over time, really from, I'd say, by the 1770s in the UK, and through industrialization and intense industrialization. But that political economy's time has run, and all of the signals from the planet, whether it's climate, whether it's ecosystems destruction, whether it's problems in the oceans, whether it's inequality, all of the basket of things that sustainability is formed to push back against. That political economy, its time has run. We can't afford that anymore, either socially or environmentally or economically.
Okay, thank you. And Masami, what about you? What's your take on the meaning of the word extractive capitalism?
It's hard to add to what Paul says, right? Because he is the expert. But I guess capitalism, when it was first created, it was supposed to be beneficial model for everyone. It's almost like a democratized version of how businesses and our everyday lives and activities would actually benefit all of us. So that was supposed to be how capitalism came, right? And then based on our skills, qualities, and ability that we can bring to this world, we will all benefit from it. But perhaps when the extractive idea got maximized through the short-term gain maximization, businesses could make all the decisions to gain more for the short term, which created a lot of long-term issues and also the income inequality as well in a big way. So that, I think, is how capitalism became extractive.
And Mike, if I can add, J.K. Galbraith, the Canadian economist, my favorite, I'm paraphrasing him, but, he's saying that, when men know things are fundamentally wrong, when and they say that they're right, that's the same danger for capitalism as it was for communism. Now I'm paraphrasing him, but he got it beautifully. We have to accept and understand the impact of extractive capitalism, as Masami has said. So apologies to Galbraith, but he nailed it wonderfully.
All right, and he also wrote a great book about the 1929 crash as well, Galbraith, if I recall. So
in the summer of 1954, he wrote it. Yeah,
indeed. So Masami, perhaps you could just tell us what regenerative capitalism is.
Right. So if, let's say, capitalism still was this concept of benefiting all, then perhaps the turning that around from short term to long term. Because if we are looking at the longer term cycle and the gains, that comes back to us all by doing what we do and decisions we make and the tactic and the strategy we apply, then perhaps longer term return is regenerative, because if we look at what's happening in the nature, it is almost similar to capitalism in the sense that every single thing in the nature will actually extract, but also go back to the soil and then create a sustainable abundance in cycle. So what happened also is in the capitalism, there's a potential to create this regenerative approach by expanding the cycle of thinking into a longer term prosperity that will actually come back to benefit all. Because, if we continue to only benefit the small group of people, and that so many are actually going through so much hardship in this world, that actually is not sustainable for anybody in the longer run, because the trust decays and also so much disruption is going to happen in our environment, which will impact all of us. Nobody can escape from that.
Okay, before I turn to you, Paul, so we've just had this comment here. I don't know who it's from. It's a funny old thing, this tool we use. Sometimes it has the names of people who post, and sometimes it doesn't. So I'm sorry, LinkedIn user. You might be my best friend for all I know. I just don't know who you are. But regenerative is about abundance, but framing like regrowth is creating challenging narratives. When you look at nature, the healthiest places are abundant. They have diversity, community, and growth. But also, nature doesn't work at 100% all the time. It moves in cycles. Businesses act as machines rather than living systems. Paul, do you have a take on that? Not necessarily on the comment, well, maybe on the comment, but on what regenerative capitalism is.
Look, capitalism is very powerful, right? But I think in the last 30 or 40, maybe 50 years, we have moved towards what I would term as peak neoliberal capitalism, right? And that's not a capitalism that I buy into, because it's where you see a concentration of political and economic power in the hands of too few. Now, whether that's I'm not anti anything, right? But whether it's fossil fuels or extractive mining, or it's the consumerist, materialistic combination of advertising and credit and driving things down people's throats, right? That for me is unhealthy neoliberal capitalism, and I think it has peaked. And we look at the impact of what has happened. Now, the economists in the 20s and 30s, if you go back to Pigou, if you go to Galbraith himself, if you range them, they had already defined the problem of externalities in the 30s. And we've spent 100 years, almost 100 years, ignoring that. So to bring it back, there are different forms and types of capitalism. And I think we're suffering now from an intense concentration of political and economic power in the hands of a few. Capitalism is powerful, but the Schumpeterian model of capitalism in terms of economics as if people mattered and small is beautiful. Now, I'm not completely adherent to that, but I think there's a balance. We need to turn the power of capitalism into protection of the planet, protection of oceans, and a greater distribution of wealth. Capitalism was never meant to create trillionaires. I'm a big believer in entrepreneurs, but in terms of the concentration of economic and political power, that is unhealthy. It never ends well.
Okay, thank you for that. I was wondering if we could just talk about light bulbs for a few minutes. And by light bulbs, I mean that light bulb that lit up above you when you decided you wanted to work in sustainability or ESG or whatever. I know, Paul, you were a journalist once. Was there a light bulb moment for you, or have you always been a little bit this way orientated?
I think there were three very quick light bulb moments. One was as a journalist in the late 80s, understanding that the Seven Sisters, the great American oil companies, had been set loose by John Sununu, Bush 1's chief of staff, into an Antarctic environmental treaty process, a closed diplomatic process to protect Antarctica. That drove my interest in environment. That was in 89, 90. I then opened my first company, Borasat Singwet Lom, which in Thai is, which in English is the environmental business company in Bangkok. And again, the second light bulb moment was seeing the intensity of the problems in Bangkok in terms of pollution, in terms of sewage issues, in terms of air quality, and thinking we cannot fix this problem unless we move trillions of dollars to address it. So we don't have a financial system that does that. How do we do it? How do we bring the infrastructure that the world needs? That was a second light bulb moment. And I think my third light bulb moment was an understanding that the very deepest pools of capital is the capital owned by ordinary workers. It's the lower level civil servants, it's police people, it's fire people, it's nurses, it's librarians. Those are the deepest pools of capital. And capitalism should reward and provide the public goods for ordinary people. And it doesn't always doing it. So 3 moments. It came in the 80s and 90s.
All right, thank you for that. And what about you, Masami? Light bulbs for you?
Yeah, I can talk about 3 too. Too much, Paul. So the first one, I think, because I grew up in Japan, and then because I'm very introverted, growing up, I didn't feel I fit, even in my own community and surroundings. But what happened was when I became a backpacker, in my young age, traveled around the world, initially thinking the world was an even more strange place, right? Because people looked different and we all spoke different languages and looked different. But the light bulb moment I had was that how similar we are as human beings, that, aspirations we have, what we cared about, the joy of eating together, like working together, so there's so much in common. So that was the initial light bulb moment to go, actually, we all fit somehow together, part of this bigger world. And then the second
that's a beautiful moment. Thank you for sharing that.
Oh, thank you. And then there's the second moment. And then the second moment is when I was young and traveling and seeing the challenges that the people faced. And, you would look at all these big problems and feel powerless, that you can't help everyone. So you would just get by living your own life. But then there was this light bulb moment when I had my daughter and became a mom for the first time. And at that time, in the profound sense of love that I felt, for the first time in my life, that deep sense of connection, somehow this feeling of compelling desire to do something about the problems that I saw, not just for my own daughter, but because I realized that we just happened to be lucky. My daughter was born in New Zealand. We were lucky. But there were so many people I met who weren't very lucky. And I thought that I wanted to do something about something, more than just my family. And so that was second light bulb moment. And then the third one was, so because that led me to become an entrepreneur. And I thought that one day when my business is successful and grow and, have more money, more time, then I would do something to give or give back, right? Like as many of us say. But then the profound third light bulb moment was realizing that when we go, one day we're going to do something, then that one day might not come. And then that led to the idea of, instead of saying one day, what if we did something today, but did it every day? And so that was kind of like third light bulb moment that took me on the path of the entrepreneurship, as well as looking at the social innovation, social impact as a part of what I wanted to relate to in my life.
All right, thank you for that, Masami. I also did backpacking as a student, but I don't remember having any light bulb moments when I was doing it. But anyhow, so what I'd like to do now is have a brief chat with Masami for about 4 minutes. Then I'll have a brief chat with you for about 4 minutes, and I'll bring you back on stage again. So I'll just say goodbye to you just for a few minutes, Paul. And it's just you and me now, Masami. So Masami is the founder and CEO of B1G1, a social enterprise and certified B Corp. B1G1, formerly known as Buy One, Give One, helps businesses around the world integrate effectively, giving a measurable impacts in what they do so that we can create a better future for all. Since 2007, the B1G1 movement has made more than 390 8 million impacts, working together with thousands of businesses, creating life-changing impacts on the lives of people across the globe. Masami has a diverse business background, is a 2 times TEDx speaker, and author of 4 books. Her insights bring simple and unique upside downs and inside out perspectives to complex issues that people often struggle to act on. Her work originates in the belief that businesses with a real sense of purpose can make a real difference in the world. So, Masami, maybe you could just tell us just a wee bit about B1G1.
Yeah, so when you said B1G1, and you did say formerly known as Buy One Give One, so people may have wondered what's B1G1, right? So I want you to just imagine this simple place where everything we do makes a difference. So imagine every time you have a cup of coffee and the child receives access to life-saving water, or every time you read a book and learn something, a child gets education or a tree gets planted. Imagine if every little thing that happens in our lives can lead to a better world for somebody else around the world. So that's the concept of B1G1. And for the last 19 years, since the founding of B1G1 in 2007, we've worked on making this a reality by working with businesses and helping them to integrate these small positive change and acts of kindness in what they do every day.
Okay, thank you for that. So, is this the SMEs or larger corporations?
When we started, we didn't really think about who this is for, right? But perhaps this was initially built for business owners and entrepreneurs, because I was an entrepreneur myself. I had my own business. So leading up to this, I mentioned a little bit about my backpacking days. And then from there, I became a business owner after I had my own child. And so for me, because food was my passion, so I chose food business as my entrepreneurship journey and created a food company that provided healthy eating options to busy working families. And eventually, this frozen meal company in Australia were distributing the packaged frozen meals to more than 150 stores in 3 different states in Australia. And in my journey, I always thought that one day when we succeed, then we would make a difference. And for me, because food was important, and I've seen so many street children who didn't have the access to healthy meals or even education. So I thought that one day establishing a foundation, building a soup kitchen, and helping street kids was something meaningful. But that one day didn't come because as a business owner, you get always so busy, you have so many priorities. So I felt like that one day was moving along. So then from there, the concept of Buy One Give One or B1G1 came to me. And then I thought, instead of doing the big thing one day, what if we gave just one meal for every meal we sold? And when the shift of idea happened, I realized that this was very game-changing, because we were no longer talking about something the company would do one day to what we can all do every day, including our team members, customers. And after that, the second realization was that what if it wasn't just about our own business, but it became a concept that many different businesses can practice. So in a sense, this was an invitation to any business to join in. And then undeniably, in the 19 years ago, when nobody was talking about ESG, or even CSR was a quite unfamiliar concept in the business world, all we were calling for was people who resonated with the idea and believed in the fact that their business can have a more than profit, and they can actually use an idea like this, be part of idea like this to build a legacy around their business. So undeniably, over the last 19 years, we worked more with small to medium-sized businesses, because these are the business owners who actually took personal care and pride in what they were doing. And then today we work with larger companies too, and especially engaging their team in this spirit of giving. But we talk about this idea of the power of small, which is not just about the small businesses, but everyday micro actions making a change.
Okay, thank you for that. A couple more comments. Eric, thank you for your comment. I wish it was sunny here. It's raining. I was going to say something rude then. It's raining quite hard here. And Manoj, I'm going to deal with your comment in a few minutes, if that's okay. Masami, we're running a little bit over time, as is always the case. So I'm going to ask you the next two questions in one. If you could try and make your answers as quick as possible. So what are the kind of outcomes you've had over the years? And can you just give me one concrete example?
Well, so you mentioned in the introduction that the B1G1 initiative have created more than 398 million, which is now 399, so nearly 400 million impacts. These are measurable acts of change, such as trees being planted, or education, number of days of education being provided, or microloans given, or so the example could be that ordinary businesses transform into extraordinary businesses because, for example, every time an accountant, provide a client a good service, then they can actually give things like access to sewing machine or a goat, so that the families will receive access to sustainable income. And we've got all these different examples, like a cafe examples exist. Every time you have a coffee, but we have many other examples when people. When they are benefiting through business activities, they can make another life better.
Okay, thank you for that, Masami. Now I'm going to bring Paul back onto the stage. Hello, Paul. Give the audience a bow, do. And Masami, I'll say goodbye to you for about 3 or 4 minutes and then bring you back on again. Okay. So Paul, so tell us the background then about how ESG came about.
It was an extension, really, of what I said earlier, that my eureka moment was, how do you move the financial system and massive amounts of capital into sustainability? So I'd been a businessman from 1991, and then a job came up in the UN, which I had known about. It was to run a partnership between the UN, United Nations Environment Programme, with banks, insurers, asset managers. And I thought that would give me access to money and capital markets. And to frame it very quickly, not to go on too long, in the early noughties, I started with myself and one administrative officer, Ken Maguire, and an intern called Jacob Malthouse. And in the early noughties, hopefully you can hear me still, Michael. In the early noughties,
I certainly can.
James Gifford came to UNEP-FI from Australia, again as an intern. We had a number of really disruptive, renegade team members, and the idea was formulated that look, we need to move the pension system to back sustainability. And that was the very beginning of what became the UN Principles for Responsible Investment, launched by Kofi Annan in 2006. And today it's backed by 5,500 pension funds and $131 trillion. ESG was our toolbox to move the debate away from corporate social responsibility or ethical investment. Nothing wrong with that. But what we wanted to do is create a toolbox which showed that environmental, social, and governance issues were material to long-term investment. And that's where ESG came. It was originally GES, Governance, Environmental, Social. Then one afternoon in May 2004, I whipped it on its head and put environment at the front, social in the middle to protect it, and governance at the end. And that's how ESG came about.
All right, thank you for that, Paul. And what does blended capital do?
Same as what I've described. Look to drive capital and finance, whether systemically or into small businesses. Look, my biggest learning lesson was a business we put into Africa in 2012 with a co-founder, Mike Sherry. We went from raising £150,000 one night in the Henley Regatta Rowing Club to serving 60,000 families, that's 240,000 people, farming and fishing families in the Lake Victoria component of Kenya around Kisumu. And what we did was it looks like a solar solar lights company, but it wasn't. It was much, much more. It was a business model providing cheap credit for farming and fishing families to create their own infrastructure, whether that's solar lights or productive use energy equipment. And that was my biggest learning experience in terms of a good business idea based upon technology, which can replicate and scale, can impact a lot of people. That business was Wazy, which means moonlight in Swahili. And that was my most joyous experience. Unfortunately, COVID killed that business, or rather, an investor who withdrew the debt capital, breaking all covenants, that destroyed the business. But the model has been replanted in Brazil, and we're working at reestablishing that. So again, it's whether it's systemic capital markets, the system, or it's actually driving businesses which deliver sustainability impacts to people and to community. That's what interests me, and that's what the blended capital does.
Okay, thanks for that, Paul. And look, you're a bit of an expert on these things. Can you define what the difference is between ESG and sustainability?
Yeah, it's really simple. Look, sustainable development from Brundtland in 1987 is the goal. Sustainability is the pathway, right? And ESG is just one of the tools in the toolbox to get there. We employed it originally to start a conversation with the asset ownership community. It was never meant as a populist tool. It's been co-opted by business and it's ended up in different parts. But don't ever excuse or confuse ESG with sustainability or sustainable development. Really simple. That's the hierarchy. Sustainable development is the goal created by governments in 1987, Grohol and Brundtland. Sustainability is the pathway where there's a range of different responses. And ESG was simply a tool developed for the institutional investment community to persuade them that environmental, social, and governance issues were material in terms of both risk, but also in terms of new markets, right? So this confusion between sustainable development, sustainability, and ESG, it should not be confusion. It's a hierarchy. Sustainable development is the goal.
Okay, so a few months ago, I read an article by John Kerry, who was Secretary of State under Obama, saying it's about time that ESG needs to focus more on why it's good for business. And it's not just about compliance. It's not just about obeying regulations. It's about being good for business. And I was thinking, and he said it like he was saying something novel that no one ever thought of. And I was thinking, that's been the theme of just about every other ESG show we've ever done.
Look,
and it does seem.
Yeah, go on, ask the question.
Well, I was going to say, there does seem to be a communications problem here. I think you and I would agree that ESG is not incompatible with good business, but that message isn't getting across. I just wondered if you've got any thoughts about that.
Well, yeah, no, I completely agree with Kerry. Look, and ESG is, everybody sees it as the risk side. It was never the risk side. It's the two-headed coin. You understand the risks, and that opens your mind as a business person or as an investor to new opportunities, whether it's in clean energy, whether it's in the bioeconomy, whether it's in the circular economy. So yes, I think what happens, and it often happens, ESG was meant to change the conversation with institutional investors. It achieved that. It's done, right? But it was then co-opted, and then it was politicized, and then it was framed as woke because it was, it was convenient to say this is about compliance. It's about restricting business. It's not. It's to free business. It's to allow business to step into a regenerative political economy and play its role and distribute the benefits of capitalism more effective to more people. By 2100, we're 10 billion people, right? So, if capitalism cannot serve the needs, whether it's infrastructure or energy or good food or security, in the next 70 years, it really has failed. So yeah, there is confusion around it. There's co-option, but these things happen. ESG did its job, got the institutional investors involved and focused, and it began to change the debate. So, I'm no great protector of it. If the term sunsets, so be it. But it is useful in that it's a positive virus implanted in the political economic system.
Okay, thank you for that, Paul. I've had a couple of comments. This one from Eric: how to facilitate the alignment of global ESG factors with contextualized CSR strategies or tactics. Do you have any very, very brief thoughts about that, Paul?
Yeah, don't confuse ESG with CSR. Corporate social responsibility in some ways it's an ethical need for business to be responsible. ESG is a technical need to understand risk, and by understanding risk, understand your fiduciary duties and your investor duties, right? So there is great confusion in the system. I get Eric's question, but we need a lot longer to answer it. I'm not criticizing CSR, but they're two very different beasts, and the confusion is widespread but understandable.
Well, maybe we should do a show on the difference between ESG and CSR. And then Manoj, what single policy or market reform would most effectively make regenerative business models more profitable than extractive ones? Do either of you have any thoughts about that?
I've got a quick thought. Right. International Swaps and Derivatives Association in 1985 changed finance for good and for bad. It created a master contract around how we manage risk. I think we need the same process. And the Blended Capital Group is involved in a process to create the International Regenerative Securities Association, right? And it's to do the same thing. It's to regularize, take taxonomies and turn them into financial instruments which are regenerative. We're at the beginning of that process. That would make a big difference in terms of flowing capital in the right place and simplifying the discussion.
Okay, thanks for that, Paul. Asami.
Yeah, I don't know how, realistic to pose this question, but I think one of the most powerful things that could change how we operate, our businesses is how we pass on our generational wealth and how we would accumulate, right? Because we know that no matter how much we accumulate, either wealth or power, when we pass away, when our life ends, we can't take that with us. But we will still try to maximize this accumulation of power and wealth, thinking that it's a good thing to do because we can hand that down to our descendant. And but what if that there is a mechanism to somehow reset that accumulation in a way so that people who actually enjoy success because of the things that they achieved in their own lifetime can enjoy that in the capitalism world. But what if it wasn't a generational accumulation? So that means the next generation will become, have a more fair starting point in terms of access to education and access to basic resources. So if that happened, then perhaps the decision making of how to create a real true success for the enterprises that you are leading might change a little bit as well. That along the way you would intentionally share and then give back as well to let that circulate more.
Michael, okay. Can I tell a very quick naughty joke off the back of that?
So you can tell a naughty joke. You can do it. Just tell me when I have to go bleep. That's all.
No, not at all. Masami-san, there's no disrespect to anyone, but my UN team back in the early noughties used to have a bit of a joke, which was when we met very rich people who said they wanted to give back, we used to say, well, what did you take away? And the second one was we had a term for very rich people who at the end of their lives want to do good, which was the, and this is the naughty bit, it was the Don't Go to Hell Club, right? So I think your earlier description of realizing that, a day might never come, to therefore I need to do good things now. And what you've done with the NEF 400 million actions is incredible. It is about acting now. And I think your legacy piece is really important. But at the same time, I think that what can we all individually do in line with your ethos, which is what do we do now?
All right. Thanks, Paul. So look, I want you to imagine, so I'm the CEO, okay, of a large multinational company. I'm under a lot of pressure. The board is screaming at me to perform. Some of my shareholders are quite proactive. And they want results. The next quarter is important. We've got to meet certain KPIs. It's tough, it's tough up here at the top. I'm really fed up with all of this. And then why should I start worrying about moving from extractive to regenerative capitalism? Can you help me out here?
Masami, do you want to go first? I have got an answer, but you go first if you want.
Well, because I haven't really worked for multinational major corporation as the CEO, So I emphasize that people who go through extreme stress and pressure to have to meet the expectation, right? Like that, fast growth, short-term returns. And when you don't achieve that, your leadership position is at risk. But there is also correlation in the shortened life, not lifespan, but the shortened tenure of CEO links with the shorter lifespan of businesses and how that links with each other. So when businesses and stakeholders can actually think about the longer term return and then can be more patient, then it helps the CEOs and the leaders to make better longer term decisions. And one person I so respect is you probably know Paul Pullman, who was the CEO of Unilever for about a decade, and what he did in relation to creating the return, not the compromising return to the investors, but also creating this longer term thinking in sustainability. So Paul, what's your take on this?
I pitch it to the board like this. I would say in just over one business cycle, that's 5 years, but in 6 years, we'll have the 40th anniversary of when the world looked at sustainable development. As a business and as a board, where do we want to be in 5 years? Where do we want to be? What is our reputation? What is your individual reputation? As a board, do we want to attach ourselves to the new, progressive, forward-looking economy and be able to stand up at Rio Plus 40 and say, this is what we've done and these are our results? Because that is the future. That's how I'd sell it to a board, in terms of saying we don't have to always think in 20, 25-year spans. What do we do in the next business cycle? We can't be perfect. What are the things we prioritize? What are the ESG absolute top priorities to make a difference in our company? How do we access the bottom 2 billion as potential customers? That's what you need to do. That's the message to the board. One business cycle, what do we do? What do we tell people at Rio Plus 40 as one platform? And get rid of the jargon, get rid of the acronyms, speak in human. That's how businesses, I think, will succeed.
All right, thank you. So what should a sustainability leader do today to create the most impactful future benefits, do you think? Any of you got any thoughts about that question?
It's a great question. It sort of riffs off what I've just said as a business leader. It's that ability to step back and strategize in the now and ask the question, our business is okay now, but the world around us, there are so many manifest problems: climate, biodiversity, inequality. How do we play our role and how do we have impact through our business activities? How do we become part of the solution, part of the future, not stay part of the problem? Those basic questions for business leaders. And, it's the same for statespeople. How do we change the long term in the now? And that can often result in really good business results. It did for Paul Pullman at Unilever, but the extractive force of capitalism, those parts of capitalism that want the return now and they want 15.4% or they want 22%, they don't want it. It's that which undermines business visionaries, I think. So it's a very difficult job, and he had a tremendously difficult job and did an incredible job doing it.
All right, thanks for that. Ms. Sami, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think sustainability position or the job or profession is pretty challenging, right? Because you think you are going to do what's right, but sometimes what you thought was right might not necessarily be seen as right, and then you could get criticized, right? Because you are trying to kind of like do a just thing. But perhaps then how to bring the best to every situation and learning opportunity is to be, first of all, authentic. That's what many people would say, bring your authentic care. But I think there's also another something that is pretty simple, which is actually love. And it's strange to be talking about this, but I think when the leaders who are leading any project or any mission is actually coming from love, it's powerful because love comes with humility and transcend the judgment. and also the humility in terms of willing to admit the mistakes or learning, and then to be still curious to keep going because you believe in the intention and love. And when you can actually powerfully communicate as a leader in leading sustainability, that you are actually coming from love for the people, and love for the planet, or love for the nature, love for the community, then even if sometimes things don't work out the way you intended things to work out, still your communication can come from the powerful place, which can be understood.
Masami, can I add to that? I couldn't agree with you more. My partner actually runs an organization in the UK called Compassion in Politics. And through that, I've now come to learn about a new initiative out of Edinburgh called Compassion in Finance. And one of the things I've learned about compassion is that this saying compassion is fierce, because compassion is about action, and compassion is definitely connected to love. So I couldn't agree with you more. As the individual business leader, the ability to take that on board. But compassion in finance, that's going to be an interesting challenge to have an impact. But let's see.
Okay, well, as a couple of philosophers, I think their names were John and Paul, if I remember correctly, said money can't buy me love. But anyhow.
They also said, let it be.
That's true. That is very true.
They also said, yeah.
Yeah, well, that's perhaps not the most imaginative line. Giorgio Perazzi, I hope I've said that right. Regenerative capitalism strikes me as a contradiction in terms. Every declining paradigm attempts to appropriate the language of the emerging paradigm. But regeneration is not about making extraction more efficient. It's about transcending an economic logic founded on extraction itself. We are not debating a new label, but two profoundly different worldviews. I don't know whether either of you got any thoughts on what I think is quite a complex idea.
Well, I fundamentally disagree with Giorgio, right? Life is about learning and movement. Capitalism wasn't sealed, signed, and delivered in one go. It's a learning process. And in terms of the combination of two words, no, it's not contradictory. I've seen many examples of where capitalism business does regenerate and does revalue things. We're working with a very interesting waste company in Brazil, which is exploring how you create a circular asset-backed security. And we're helping them do that. That's regenerative capitalism. So, Giorgio, no, I don't agree with you. I respect you. I respect your opinion, but I don't agree with you.
All right, fair enough. Masami, anything to add?
I think both extractive and regenerative approach can have a result there in terms of what prosperity could mean. It could be growth, it could be profit, it could be longevity. The definition of what success looks like can be different, but then either approach could bring results. But perhaps what kind of result we want to have is decisions we can make, choices we can have. And when we were thinking about real success as human beings, then many people talk about their families and children or grandchildren. So there is that inherent natural tendency for humans to care about actually the long-term prosperity, not only for yourself, but for the next generations. So if, let's say, more of the people saw that the business where we spend so much of our time, majority of our time on our work, is also an expression of our human desire to prosper and succeed in the term that we are most, we most resonate with, then perhaps we can choose extractive or regenerative capitalism cycle. Is which one is the way we want to succeed.
Michael, if I can add to that with one sentence, in some ways, extractive capitalism is about me. Regenerative capitalism is about you. And if it's people-centered and you're thinking outward in terms of delivery, that's a healthy. I think that's a healthy directive.
Okay, so extractive would be me, myself, and I, and regenerative would be quite different from that. You mentioned signed, sealed. We,
yours,
and us.
yours, and the planet. We love you. To riff off Masami.
Sounds good. So you mentioned signed, sealed, and delivered earlier. I really can't remember who it was that sung that, but I can hear the tune in my head. Alan Langston commented, shouldn't regenerative just be a golden rule in sustainable capitalism? I suppose. Are they the same thing? They are, aren't they? I think.
I just spent the last 2 days in Brussels with the European biostimulants sort of group, right? And it's fascinating in terms of the shift from synthetic fertilizers to actually using things that have been used for millennia. What a really good example of a biostimulant is seaweed, and the use of seaweed in food security and in crops. And with that, I saw, there's an effort from the industry side to think differently, renew. I'm sure some activists, some campaigners would see it just as an effort to rebrand an industry. But having spent 2 days on the science and the thought and the care around how you use what's good in nature to compound and bring us greater food security, I think that's a great example of regenerative business. Complicated, not easy, but people addressing real problems.
Okay, it was Stevie Wonder, by the way, who said signed, sealed, and delivered. So I'm going to ask you 2 more questions each. The second question will be the last question, and really, I just want you to say anything that you feel is important, which you haven't said up to now. But before I do that, I want you to imagine it's the year 2040. Not a year I'm looking forward to, because I'm going to be pretty old in that year, but we have successfully bridged the gap between extractive and regenerative capitalism. What does a normal successful company look like, and what had to change to get us there, do you think? So a little bit of crystal ball gazing for you here, I think.
I would riff off what I said before. By 2040, the regenerative securities model, with all its acronyms, bioeconomy, debt obligations, regenerative farming, asset-backed securities, all of that paraphernalia is thriving and flowing trillions a year and even trillions a day into climate, into carbon and biodiversity in a way which is helpful and positive. Let's forget that to touch 1.5, which in many people think is lost, we need to move $1.5 trillion a year. At the moment, we've got tens of billions at the most. We need a game changer. So I could go on, but I won't. But that's what I'd love to see in 2040.
Several zeros is the difference, in other words.
Yeah, and applied to a regenerative model. But I'm sure Masami's got some wisdom to add. So
I'm sure you have, Masami. Can you give us some wisdom here?
With the pace and the speed of what's happening in the world, if we are still here in 2040, which I hope we are, no, because
you mean us 3, or you mean people in general?
Well, like us 3 too, but people, all of us.
That would be a very long podcast, Masami, if we're still at it in 2040. There you go.
But if we still exist, then it's quite likely that we figured out something. Right, like, or we might very exist in the more challenging political climate and competition and conflicts, and would that accelerate in that direction, or would that actually, would we find a way to actually create this regenerative model? Because then, whether it's 2040, 2040, or 50, or 100, or we will still be here, but in this pace, change is so fast. So when you say 2040, I could not necessarily pinpoint how it's going to look like. Where if I was 30 years ago, looking at 10 years' time, I could kind of predict where we were going a little bit more, certainly. So I guess when we were looking at still being here in 2040, we probably figured out how to create a more holistic, sustainable way of doing things. So businesses maybe recognized and rewarded in different way than just having the maximum profit, as the direct return of what success looks like.
All right, thank you. Well, I got some terrible news, which is that much as I know you would love to, we're not going to be able to sit here talking until the year 2040. Sorry to break it to you, but maybe we could reconvene in we could get together again in the year 2040.
We can put it on our calendar now.
We can do. I'll send you a calendar invite.
Let's make our appointment.
Paul and Masami, is there anything you want to add? Anything important that you'd like to finish today with?
Can I add 2 very brief points? Look,
of course you can.
The whole podcast without mentioning AI. And my favorite AI is actually not artificial intelligence, it's ancient intelligence. We need to apply ancient intelligence just as much as we do artificial intelligence. And the second thing is, very quickly, we did in April for the David Brown Foundation a report on the global bioeconomy and how investors can play into that. And there's a beautiful thing. The front picture we use is Van Gogh's last picture, which is called Tree Roots, which he painted a few months before he died. And for over a century, no one understood what the picture was, right? They really didn't understand what the picture was or where it came from. They thought it was his troubled mind. And then in COVID, the director of the Dutch Van Gogh Institution went back to where Van Gogh had ended his life in rural France. And he actually found the bank showing the tree roots that Van Gogh had actually painted, right? And it's a beautiful allegorical tale. For a century, we couldn't understand the picture. And then someone went and found it. So it's that allegory of quite often what we're looking for, what we're trying to achieve is right in front of us. And I think regeneration is part of that. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Paul. And what about you, Masami? Any wisdom to finish today on?
Well, looking back at my life, the time I learned most was from 2 groups of people. One group was farmers, and I spent the time living with farmers in Japan for 2 years, learning from how they created their own prosperity, which is abundance or harvest year after year. And the simple learning is that you just have to put the things back into soil, and then respect the nature and natural cycle and make decisions that connect with the natural cycle. So that was one thing. And another group of people are the people who actually showed me what generosity looked like. And so, but the generosity didn't exist in places where people had the most amount of resources. Generosity existed anywhere, at any point, in those who chose generosity over hoarding, even if they had little. And somehow, what I saw out of curiosity was that the people who had more didn't necessarily look most satisfied, but the people who are sharing, regardless of how much they had, seems to be most contented with what they had. And so if the question was, how do we spend the quality of quality time in our lives, then regardless of where we are at, just by sharing just a little bit of what we already have could potentially unlock that abundance thinking, or so that's perhaps the takeaway that I had from unexpected places.
All right, well, thank you for that, Masami. And I love your concept about ancient intelligence, Paul. Which reminds me of what we're going to be talking about next week, because I think ancient intelligence would tell us that when we're having a conversation, not to be looking at our phones all the time, And so next week we're actually talking about being present, about for leadership being present. I looked at my phone twice during the show. Once to get a WhatsApp message from someone to say they're enjoying the show, so that was good. And once I looked at it to look up who wrote Signed, Sealed and Delivered. So anyway, thank you very much indeed for both of you today, and see you next week. Thank you.
Masami, lovely to chat with you. And Michael,
lovely to chat with you too. And thank you everybody for tuning in.
Yeah, Michael Baxter, you definitely Nobel Peace Prize. or Environment Prize. But thank you for your leadership, Michael.
Well, thank you, Paul. Thank you very much. Well, if you'd like to nominate me, I'll send you your $5 in the post. Thank you very much.
As long as you nod at me when you walk across the stage, right? Okay.
Yeah.
That's all I ask.
That's a deal. That's a
if
deal.
You can nod at me and Masami if we're sitting in the front row. Okay.
Yeah, of course. You expect a nod.
All right. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the
Thank
opportunity.
you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.